lunch. But the last few minutes, kind of let me talk about what I do, and sort of in answering Jonathan's question. So one of the things that happens is that you move from a world that is about allocating scarcity to a world that's negotiating abundance. Now, what happens in a world that's all about abundance? The thing that becomes scarce is time and attention. So individual human time and attention is the only thing that's left that's scarce. We all know that in our day-to-day lives. It is the only thing that is left as scarce. And so, how do you get an individual's time and attention? That is kind of the new corporate problem. That's the new problem for governments. It's getting time and attention. And so what's happening now is that, take the telcos, for example. For 80 years, they had a great scarcity business. They were the only, in 1996, before the internet was kind of commercial, if you wanted to communicate with someone, guess what? You wrote a letter, you picked up that phone and dialed if you were still dialing, or you got on an airplane, okay? That is awesome. I worked at Bell Laboratories in those days, and we used to watch. There would be an earthquake, say, in San Francisco. We're like, dang, AT&T's going to get a boost this quarter because they had earthquake in San Francisco, everybody had to call everybody. And oh, by the way, we're charging by minute for everything. So AT&T could report, oh yeah, we had a great quarter. It was either people were being born, or there was some kind of hurricane or something, and that boosted AT&T's profits. It's no longer the case. And so all the corporations, all the telcos, they're figuring out, what do I have to do to attract people? And so in the government's a problem because essentially if you could think about the game as sort of like the rock, paper, scissors, so you have government, corporations, and the public, none of them really own the other, right? So, everybody has advantages. But what happens is, if you can align two of those guys, if you can get corporate and government together, they can kick ass to the public, right? But what's happening now in this sort of world of abundance is the corporations are changing sides. They're going to go with public because, again, take AT&T, for example, sort of the world's largest telco by revenue. Nobody's coming to their network unless they offer something that of value. AT&T now sort of internally has this thing called the Net Promoter Score, which they basically track. They ask all their customers, would you recommend me to your friend or whatever? And that is now kind of a driving factor within the company as to how well they're doing. So it is changing. We haven't entirely changed, but as far as government goes, government's kind of pretty happy, right, where it is. In 2000, the U.S. government, the total tax revenue was like 2.3, 2.4 trillion. Now they get to spend 3.7 trillion. So government is monotonically growing. Laws are monotonically growing. And so there is, you kind of get to that point where you do need to hit the reset button.
But you don't think that peer-to-peer networking and the internet will disintermediate the nation state the way it's done to everything else?
Yeah, no, I think it will. So I think, well, I guess you didn't tell anybody that, right? So that I have to go back down to Washington tomorrow. But so in the end, yeah, that's what Barlow is saying. We still all kind of live in a physical place, and so the thing that really changes is accountability, right? So today, the way that the U.S. government is organized, it tracks itself based on what it spends money on. There's no one tracking actual outcomes. I'm trying to do this, and then it was an outcome. And so what will happen is if people get more organized and we kind of get past our learned helplessness in terms of affecting government, there will be more accountability of government. There will still be a government, and as far as just like there's local governments. There's lots of layers of government, but it won't have a free reign.
To some extent, it sounds like a charter of this kind is more essential than ever, lest we become a Hobbesian, chaotic state of individuals without any oversight from government.
Yeah.
So, all right, but this brings up the terrifying question. We've spent 45 minutes here trying to workshop something. We've had a discussion. This is the nature of almost all legal and policy discussions. It's a lot of talk, and then they sort of end up in the vacuum, and very little gets resolved. I think we are desperately in need of something like this, and at some point soon. So, Do you have thoughts on the next step? And I have actually one. I'm going to use, as a law professor, we occasionally prevail upon the Socratic method. So where are my students? I'm actually going to single out one of my students to share possibly what I think his thoughts might be. We had a pitch competition yesterday. We launched our first ever Cube Innovators Pitch Competition. So this is an effort to train lawyers to think and function like entrepreneurs. The objective was to have law students figure out, and we're going to have a little, maybe we should do it now. Should we talk about the Cube stuff up here now? Or should we take it downstairs? Take it downstairs, all right. But I do want to single out one of the students, the student who won yesterday's pitch competition, because I think he is building a platform that may play in beautifully to the creation of your citizen charter for cyberspace. So something's got to happen. We have to figure out a way for the entire world to participate. And it seems like the best method, physical contact makes some sense, but shouldn't we build the sort of the what-if wiki for the creation of this unified global document?
Yeah, I mean, ultimately it's customer acquisition, right? So this is, let's say this is a startup. It's not anything unless it has customers, people that are participating. So the question is, what's sort of the next step for participation?
So Jared, I want to put you on the spot for a second and grab a mic. The question for you is, having heard what Dan has been engaged in here, and you saw him speak about this last month also, do you think this lends itself to a platform like the What If Wiki? Is there a way to crowdsource on a global wiki speculative, policy formation along this line?
It could. I mean, that's the advantage of the platform, is that you can use it for ideas that are really practical and ideas that are very, very theoretical and kind of broad-based like this. The advantage here, I think, and for those who were at the Cube competition yesterday, I've heard some of the questions that the judges raised. The advantage of what you got here is that you've already created a baseline charter that you'd like to start with. And one of the problems I identified in implementing this project, which basically would be a two-part website, some kind of encyclopedic wiki that documents areas where the law is not keeping up with the needs of innovative inventors, and then separately some kind of crowdsourced policy proposals component that draws on the wiki content to collaboratively outline new legislation and new proposals in a way that people can annotate them and leave their comments, and we can document some discussion. So what I'm saying is, I think that the draft that you've got here is helpful in that the crowdsourced policy proposal section would already start with a draft. We wouldn't have to worry about where that first draft is going to come from that everybody's going to discuss. That's one of the main challenges of taking an idea from one part of the site to the other.
So what I like about using something like What If Wiki is you have this template, and then someone can speculate, what if we wrote this language? And then the crowd, the world, can say, well, I think this would happen. And we can sort of figure out what possible scenarios, what domino effect happens from drafting something a particular way. By the way, we have a rigger in the audience here. I don't know. David is the president of the New York City chapter of the Internet Society. So whatever happens here is probably relevant to the local community that is the Internet Society.
Okay, so my question, the issue of ownership was brought up earlier in terms of ownership of the actual infrastructure. Would it be better? I think it's a question, so the answer is yes. Would it be beneficial to, in this charter, advocate the use of open source technology so that people can understand what the technology they're using, particularly on the software side, is actually doing and be able to modify that to better suit their needs?
So if you go to cyberdeclaration.org, which was sort of an interim step in our thinking, we listed essentially the ways in which power gets concentrated, right? So as you go through this process, you really go off the rails to the extent that someone can hijack it and concentrate power and create a new monarchy or whatever, be it some scheme. And so that's one of them in the sense of advocating for transparency, et cetera. So again, humans have been presumably roughly the same in terms of human nature for a long time. So it's not really an argument of saying, oh, all humans everything's okay. What you're really struggling with is how do you get to this place where we can do a better job than we've done. And the nation state was terrific as long as it worked for us.
Yes, hello. I just think if you're going to start implementing that, it's very important that you immediately consider other languages and cultures, because the cyberspace is defined by its international character, and if it is seen as a initiative or an English-based initiative, it's going to be difficult. And one other thing I wanted to say is the Declaration of Independence. I know in the US it has a very positive meaning. From Europe, it is, I mean, we do see that maybe you could consider a declaration of interdependence as an analogy.
Yeah, and so I agree with you on both points. I think the other thing I would say is that really the larger point here is the engagement, is the conversation. The status quo, the unit of power is the individual, right? So even if you're Hitler, you can't do anything unless you can get all the people to go along with you. And so the unit of power has always been the individual. How do you move the individual? So part of our challenge here in this process is to engage the individual, get everybody participating in the process. It's not so much that we're going to get to this document that, whoa, we've got it, that's the one. It really has to be engaging, getting people a feeling of success. The other thing is that the intent would be to, like a sort of a lawyer, sort of professional association, you then go after the existing relationships that are out there. So if Facebook changes something about their privacy, which they're likely to do, a month or so from now, then the people in the TR channels, well, that seems like a violation of what we are standing for, and sort of collectively can push back on that. And so these sorts of things, and like any startup, you get these little successes, and it builds and builds and builds as long as it's useful. Right? I think we're done.
Yeah, I want to look. This is a revolution that you're talking
Okay, yeah,
about.
we're going to get those. But anyway, just round of applause for everybody. Thanks a lot.
At the very least, my students and my future students have a long-term, serious homework assignment. All right, put some meat on this, make it mean something. I guess we're heading back downstairs, and we're going to kick it off with the CUBE announcements. Is that what we'll do? Okay. And then we'll have a few student demos as well. And then moving into, what are we doing, crowdfunding? Crowdfunding along? All right. See you all back down on Saturday.